Greetings to all. Portion for today's reading is from Book of Job, chapters 24 to 28. In Job 24, Job speaks about the injustice in the world where the wicked seem to go unpunished. He describes how the poor are oppressed, widows and orphans suffer, and yet God appears silent. The wicked exploit the vulnerable, steal, and live in darkness. Justice seems delayed or absent. Job struggles to understand why God allows such inequality. This chapter reflects the mystery of God's timing. Though evil appears to prevail, it does not escape God's notice. It reminds us that God's justice is not always immediate, but is certain. Faith is tested when righteousness does not seem awarded. Trust in God must go beyond visible circumstances. Even today, injustice and inequality exist in society. Believers may feel discouraged when wrongdoers prosper. This teaches patience and perseverance in righteousness. We are also called to stand for justice and care for the oppressed. In Job 25, Bildad gives a short speech emphasizing God's greatness and human insignificance. He declares that no one can be righteous before God. Even the moon and stars are impure in His sight. Humanity is described as weak and unworthy. This highlights God's holiness and the gap between divine perfection and human frailty. It reminds us of our need of God's mercy. Human pride is challenged in the presence of God's greatness. True righteousness comes only through God. People often rely on their own goodness, but this chapter reminds us of our dependence on God. It encourages humility and reverence. We should approach God with a surrendered heart. It also reminds us not to judge others harshly. In Job 26, Job responds sarcastically to Bildad and then speaks about God's power in creation. He describes God's control over the heavens, the seas, and the underworld. God's greatness is beyond human understanding. What humans see is only a small glimpse of His power. God's majesty and sovereignty are beyond comprehension. This chapter invites awe and worship. It reminds us that God is in control of all creation. Even in suffering, His power remains unchanged. In times of confusion, we can trust God's supreme power. The universe itself reflects His authority. This brings comfort that nothing is out of His control. It calls us to worship rather than question endlessly. In Job 27, Job firmly maintains his innocence and refuses to admit wrongdoing falsely. He declares that he will hold on to his righteousness. He also acknowledges that wicked will ultimately face destruction. Their prosperity is temporary. Integrity before God is more valuable than human approval. Job shows unwavering faith despite suffering. It teaches that truth must not be compromised. God ultimately judges both the righteous and the wicked. In a world of compromise, this chapter calls us to remain truthful and upright. Even under pressure, we must not give in to false accusation. It reminds us that success without righteousness is empty. Integrity is a lifelong commitment. In Job 28, this chapter is a poetic reflection on wisdom. Human can mine deep into the earth for treasures, but true wisdom cannot be found by human effort. Only God knows the way to wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom is not intellectual, but spiritual. It comes from a relationship with God. Reverence and obedience to God leads to true understanding. God alone is the source of ultimate truth. In today's knowledge-driven world, wisdom is often confused with information. This chapter teaches us that true wisdom comes from fearing God. Decisions should be guided by God's principles. A God-centered life leads to true understanding. Points to ponder. Why does God allow injustice for a time, and how should we respond in faith? Are we seeking worldly knowledge or godly wisdom in our daily decisions? May God bless everyone. Amen.